You're listening to Desire and Power with your host, Mira Salem.
Hey guys, welcome back to Desire and Power. If you're new here, hi, I'm Mira, and this podcast is a space where we honestly talk about desire, power, psychology, intimacy, and the parts of our inner lives that don't really fit into neat, socially acceptable boxes. Now, today's episode is a conversation that I've been really looking forward to sharing. I got to sit down with a dominant from the BDSM community, and what unfolded ended up being one of the most grounded, thoughtful, and human conversations I've had on this podcast so far. We talk about what dominance actually is, not the version that people imagine when they hear the word, especially, it's not about abuse or control, but we talked about dominance as responsibility, as leadership, as care, and as accountability. We got into what it really takes to hold power ethically, what consent actually means beyond a checkbox, how communication and humility play a huge role, and why being a dominant is often far more about attunement and emotional labor than it is about ego or authority. And what really stood out to me in this conversation is how clear he was, how clear it became for him that dominance isn't about taking something, but about giving something, right? It was about creating safety and pleasure and structure and meaning for another human being. So this episode is for anybody who's curious about power dynamics, for anyone who's ever misunderstood kink, and for anyone who wants a more honest, nuanced understanding of desire and responsibility and how they intersect. So with that, let's get into the conversation. Hello and welcome to the show. How are you today?
Not too bad.
Thank you so much for being here. We're going to get right into it because we got a lot of ground to cover. So today I am sitting with a good friend of mine, and we're going to have a conversation about masculinity, dominance, and sexuality. So we're going to start off with, how do you define your sexuality? And not just in terms of orientation, but in how you actually experience desire and power.
Okay, well, I am a hetero cis male. I view myself and act as a dominant partner when I am in any kind of dynamic. It's not necessarily sexual, but it is just kind of a thing that I aim to put myself in most dynamics. That's friendships, that's work relationships, not dominant in necessarily a matter of I am the one being served. That does manifest itself on the sexual side of things a few times, but more in the idea that I always want to be the one who is in control of my own actions.
Thank you so much for sharing. Now, do you experience dominance as something sexual first or something psychological first that maybe becomes sexual later on?
Definitely in the psychological first. With dominance for me, there's even times when, especially if it's BDSM, that there is no sexual component whatsoever. Whether that's with my partner, I am poly, with my current partner, sometimes it's something that ends in or occurs during sexual scenes. Other times it's something that's entirely psychological. One of us or both of us might just have some kind of psychological need that needs to be met, so we enact a scene that does that. I've had that with friends too, where it's been completely non-sexual, but I will take out like my claws and I will spend like 20 minutes just scratching up their back because it's something I enjoy doing and it's something that puts them into a pleasant, floaty headspace. So sexual sometimes comes from it, but psychological first and foremost, especially with BDSM.
So when someone hears the word dominant, we know that in our society they often project a lot onto that word, but I want to understand what dominance actually means to you.
Responsibility and accountability. If you are dominant, it means, or if you are dominant in what I would consider a healthy sense, it means you've had the communication, it means you've obtained clear, unbiased, unpressured consent, which means you can't get consent from somebody who is half asleep. You can't get consent from somebody who is like drunk or tripping out or anything like that. But you've done the work of communication, you've achieved the consent, and then you accept the responsibility. A lot of what I see in unhealthy dominant relationships is that somebody wants to be dominant and they want to be in charge, but then if something goes wrong, suddenly they want to run away or they want to deflect from it and say, oh, that's not my problem. To me, dominance is you are taking the power and therefore you are also taking the responsibility. You're responsible for when things go well, you're responsible where things go really south.
So you kind of already answered my second question, which was, what do people usually get wrong about it? But is there anything you wanted to add to that?
For people, I would say there's two things. And again, this is just one man's opinion. In a relationship where BDSM is involved, what I see unhealthy is people get some consent or partial consent, and then they believe that that just gives them carte blanche to do whatever they want. They're the one in power, they get to make the decisions. For people who are outside of a BDSM dynamic or the community and does not have that knowledge about it, people think dominant and they immediately think an abuse of power. And that could be physical abuse, that could be emotional abuse, that could be political abuse. But people think dominant and immediately think, okay, this is a power imbalance and must be non-consensual.
Well, I'm glad that we're here talking about it because I agree. When did you first realize that dominance was a part of you, not as a role, but as a real internal orientation in your life?
The first conscious thing I can think of was actually back at university in first year. We were doing a workshop in one of my political science courses. Yes, I am somebody who took poli-sci. I'm one of those guys. But we were given the task of we had to complete a task as a group and just given free rein to do that. And I was new to university. I think I was in my first month or something. And I had to kind of really tamp down on my natural inclinations to just, when I see everybody milling about, not doing anything, just step forward and go, okay, this is what we're doing. Let's move forward unless somebody's got a better idea, because standing around doing nothing isn't going to achieve anything. And I didn't want to cause waves because I didn't know the social rules or anything of the situation. So I forced myself to keep quiet. And then reflecting back on that later, was just like, that was a struggle not to just do what I thought needed to be done and step forward and just do it.
So it sounds like a big part of that was, taking the leadership role.
Is a natural inclination of mine. And so with leadership does become responsibility. And so that I think was the first time that I really looked at myself and went, that's just an instinctive core response of my personality.
So would you then experience dominance as something that you do or something that you are?
It's something that you do because it's one of those things, because like if you love someone, you are doing the act of love. You're not just somebody who loves. People are a lot more multifaceted about that. And then dominance especially is something that you need to be able to turn on and turn off when needed. Because sometimes you don't always need somebody stepping into the leadership role, and sometimes other people are better suited for it. And sometimes it's just a matter of the spotlight shouldn't always be on you. As somebody who loves playing tabletop role-playing games, that's a big thing, is that it's just one of the worst traits you can have as a player at the table is thinking you're the main character rather than the group in the party. So with dominance, you can't always have it on. Otherwise, all you're doing is being arrogant and assuming that your needs and wants supersede everybody else's at all times.
Thank you. Moving on to talking a little bit more about how power comes into all of this. Obviously, we talked about how a lot of people conflate dominance with abuse, but how do you personally distinguish power exchange from harm?
Communication and consent, because in a healthy um, power exchange, you've already discussed what are everybody's boundaries. You've discussed what the triggers are, and you've achieved the consent. And you also realize that consent is never perpetual. Consent can be withdrawn at any point. And therefore, it's not just, oh, they said I could do this thing, I can do it forever going on, no matter what, nothing will change. Because what is given consent and is okay for one night, the next night, person could be in a different headspace and it's not what they want and not what they need, and it could be something that makes them feel triggered. And it's the people who ignore that, who decide to just act without doing the groundwork, that is where abuse comes. And then on the other side of that, it's the people who go, okay, I have done the act, and now I am abdicating all of my responsibility for taking responsibility for the consequences. Because even if consent is willfully and enthusiastically given, especially after the end of a scene, the Dom is responsible for the aftercare of the sub. They can't simply go, okay, I've had my fun, I like spanked you or I choked you or something, and now I get to leave while you're trying to deal with putting your whole brain back together because you've just been floating on cloud nine for the last 30 minutes.
So, I mean, you kind of just answered, where does responsibility live in a healthy power dynamic? And from the sounds of it, it kind of does live within the dominant side of that dynamic.
It lives within both. The day-to-day sort of like immediate, I have been given the power, that is where the responsibility lies. However, on the sub side of things, it is their responsibility to voice what they need to be voiced, to not just go, oh, this is what my Dom wants, so I need to do it even if I am supremely uncomfortable with it. It's their responsibility to advocate for themselves. That is why things like safe words exist. Because at the end of the day, if the responsibility was entirely on the Dom and not on the sub at all, we wouldn't need safe words.
Very, very true.
But the sub is responsible for letting the Dom know where the boundaries are, what is too much, and for not just being a rampant people pleaser and going, okay, well, this makes you happy, so I'm ignoring everything about this that makes my skin crawl.
I'm really glad that we're talking about this. It is super, super important part of the dynamic that sometimes we skip over when we talk to just the Dom or just the sub, and we focus on just that part. But you're right, it is the responsibility of both people to how they bring themselves into that situation. But what kind of emotional or psychological labor does being dominant actually require? Like, how could you kind of classify or quantify that?
That's really hard to quantify because that's something that is different from person to person and different from dynamic to dynamic. Like I mentioned, I'm in a polyamorous relationship. My partner has another partner, and their interaction is far different than my interaction with my partner. They are also dominant to my partner, but they do it from a different position, from a different experience. They are able to handle a lot more of the logistical stuff than I am, simply because they've been doing this for 20 years more than I have. They are able to be the teacher a lot more than I am, because simply due to a greater depth of experience. However, the dynamic that I have with our shared partner, when I am being dominant, I end up having a lot more of the emotional labor of the moment, where I am needing to be constantly aware, like, okay, is this too much for my sub right now? Am I causing problems? Do I need to check in? Like, there's a lot of like mental labor that goes into being constantly hyper vigilant about, okay, I just hit you, I just scratched you, I just bit you. Is this happy response? Is this, no, this is bad response, and I need to just do a quick check-in and be like, hey, are you okay? We are? Okay, smack away. Emotionally, especially when you get to aftercare afterwards, you are having to be there and put yourself in a position where you are available for someone else after what was also a intense, intimate moment for you. When you are a dom and let's say you have somebody on a table and you are caning them. They're the one going through all the physical abuse. They're getting all the physical stimulation out of it. They're the ones who are going to need to have kind of like their brain put back together afterwards. They're the ones that's going to need to be like burritoed up in a blanket and held tight and told how good they were. Like, where they did so well in like taking everything and communicating. But it's still you are the one who is inflicting pain, you're inflicting stress on someone that comes with its own emotional toll, even if you enjoy it. If you enjoy spanking someone, there is still part of a thing of, well, I am physically striking another human being with the intent to cause harm. That is 100% been given the consent, and they do enjoy this, but there is still a part of me that's just like, I am inflicting pain. You also need to use that time to kind of put yourself back together. And so there's a lot of emotional strain on both sides. There's a lot of psychological labor that goes into it. And it's just consistently focusing, and like, you get overstimulated too. And especially if you're neurodivergent, you may need to then go and be like, okay, I've done the aftercare. Now I need to take care of me and go and like have a bit of a quiet space because I have just been like moving this cane up and down for the last 40 minutes and I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I need to give my brain a reset.
Again, this is such a good conversation. I'm so glad we're having this.
Me too.
So, in your experience, this is going to be a tough question, so feel free to take your time with it. But in your experience, who actually holds the power in these exchanges? Is it the dominant or the submissive?
Oh, it's both. That's the thing. It's that both sides are human. They have their own power of autonomy. Power can be shared. It can be transferred over. But again, this is where healthy consent goes, is the submissive in a healthy dynamic should be able and should be comfortable with reclaiming their autonomy and power at any time. Where that's where the safe word comes in, where if it's getting too much for the submissive and they say banana, well, then the power is right back with the submissive. This is not something that is just it's not like you're holding a teapot, which is the dominance teapot, and you're handing it back and forth. Both sides hold their own teapot, and you can share it back and forth. You can consent to go, I am giving my teapot to the dominant, and he is now holding both teapots, but I could have my teapot back at any point. If the dominant refuses to give the teapot back after agreeing through the communication and consent that the submissive can reclaim that teapot, then that's an unhealthy relationship. That is one that is being built too much on ego and on arrogance and the idea that I know you better than you know yourself, so I am going to remove your own advocacy without your consent. And again, that's where consent becomes something that can be withdrawn at any point.
Mm-hmm.
Because you cannot give your consent to another human being and know that they will be flawless with it, because we're all human. We all make mistakes. And you will never be a perfect dom or a perfect submissive because you're going to make mistakes. It could even be down to something like you didn't get a good sleep or your blood sugar's a bit low, and so you weren't paying too much attention and oops, I stepped over a line. That doesn't mean that, okay, everything is garbage and you're horrible. It just means now we need to make a readjustment. I will temporarily give some of the power back to the submissive so that they can establish this is where the boundaries were like bent or stepped apart, and we can establish what steps need to be taken to reset it.
Thank you. That was great. But we are going to move into something else that I wanted to bring up because I think this is a big part of the conversation as well. To talk about yourself a little bit, do you consider yourself highly intelligent or neurodivergent in any way?
Definitely neurodivergent, as evidenced by the consistent over-explaining of every answer. um, I am autistic. I would I disagree with a lot of ideas about intelligence, like by systemic measurements and everything. I was one of the gifted kids when growing up for the tests and that, but also that just kind of, for lack of a better way of saying it, just identified all the neurodivergence in the room rather than really measured intelligence. But I am definitely like fully autistic.
Yeah, I understand what that feels like. Why do you think BDSM, especially when it comes to conscious power exchange, attracts a lot of neurodivergent or what we call highly intelligent people?
Uh, well, it's got its sense of novelty. It is countercultural, so it draws people who don't want conformity, and neurodivergence and like intelligent people don't necessarily always want to be part of the crowd. It's also a phenomenal release mechanism for everyday stress. I mean, there's stereotypes do sometimes get like basis in fact, where you have the stereotype of the powerful CEO who controls every aspect of his life, and then he goes home and he hires a dominatrix who treats him as a slave because that's his way of going, okay, I have to constantly be on and in control all the time. I'm using BDSM as an outlet so that I can basically turn my brain off and not be the one consciously in control and give it to someone else. So I think that it's an outlet, it's something that promotes individuality and uniqueness. And then it's, for a lot of people, it's great for regulating. Like, again, my partner loves being submissive because it takes a lot of, they feel it takes a lot of the responsibility off of their shoulders, and then it's just okay, I don't have to constantly be the one who's control of my own destiny, even if it's just for the next 40 minutes.
Oh, I feel that. That
Probably
is.
why we get along so well.
Can you walk us through how a scene is actually created, like all the way from conversation to aftercare?
Okay. Uh, so there's a few things. Like, you can absolutely be spontaneous with it. Uh, that's something that once you get to know a partner really well and you get to know their ins and outs and their kinks and that, you can have just a random scene. Like, could be in bed and you guys just start fooling around and a scene develops because you've had the conversations and everything to have that sort of familiarity. You should still get consent and everything, because there's been plenty of times when I've been fooling around with someone and it's just like, oh, just I'm not feeling into choking today. And then it's just like, okie dokie, you were yesterday, but that was yesterday and this is now. So I'm not going to choke you. When it's something special, when it's something specific, especially if it's like a public scene, like if you go to an event, for example, I'm going to be doing a scene with my partner at a kink convention that's coming up. And so we had a big conversation last night about this where we determined, okay, what style is it going to be? In this case, it's a sadistic massage. We discussed things like what's the structure going to be, because if we're planning to have aim for around 45 minutes, we don't want it to just be 45 minutes of constant pain, because various psychological reasons, physiological reasons. So we decided we're going to break it up into periods of the BDSM, and then like loving, caring massage, and then I'm going to like put my full body weight into her IT band for 5 minutes. Then I'm going to give her a head scratch kind of thing. We went over some of the logistics of it, like, okay, what tools are allowed, what areas need to be avoided, because either damage can be caused if you try and squeeze those too hard, or this area is just too ticklish, or doing this technique would create a different kind of pain and bring you out of the pain that is intended. So there's lots of logistical stuff for it. In the beginning, we very much had talks about psychological triggers. Things like, are you okay with being denigrated? Like with me insulting you? Or if someone has a praise kink, are they someone who needs to be consistently praised? Or do they really need to earn it? Or can you even give them a task that they are like set up to fail so that you can punish them? Some people love that. Some people like being given an impossible task because the punishment is what they enjoy. Other people hate that feeling of being sabotaged and they don't want to be punished. They just need to have the threat of the punishment so that it forces them to do something. And so you don't want to give them a task that they're being set up to fail, or you're like you don't want to give them the thing where you have like the dollar bill on the ground and every time they reach for it, you've got a fishing line attached to it and you're yanking it away. They don't enjoy that. So you need to go through all these things, especially at the beginning of a relationship or dynamic. See what are the no-go zones, see what are the sensitive areas, figuring out the logistics of it so that, and also knowing what can be a surprise and what can't be. Like
Yeah.
it can be a surprise to like, oh, I'm not going to tell you exactly what I'm going to do, but I am going to, some people are fine with that. Some people are like, just surprise me. Other people are like, hey, if you're going to bring out a knife into the situation because we're going to do some edge play, I need to know that and so that I can be in the proper mindset for that. And then when it comes to aftercare, everybody's different. A common thing is security and physical comfort. So cuddling's a big one. Burritoing someone up in a big blanket is a regular one. Verbal affirmation for a lot of people, especially if they have that praise kink, that's a lot of where the reward comes from too, where it's just like, okay, it's not so much you let me beat the crap out of your butt for the last 20 minutes. It's you endured what I did to your butt for the last 20 minutes. You are such a good girl. I'm so proud of you. You did such a good job. Like I really went into that and you just took all of it. That's amazing. I'm so fucking proud of you. That's the kind of thing where like aftercare, you go into that, you're reaffirming them, you are, like I said, putting their brain back together because they're going to be flooded with adrenaline. They're going to be flooded with endorphins. If pain is something that's been brought into this, then they're going to probably be stinging. They might feel like their back's on fire because you've just been scratching the crap out of it, sort of thing. There's going to be lots of physical sensations, mental discombobulation, and you are providing an anchor for them in the way that they need to put themselves back together. And it will also help you as the Dom do that because you are the one who is facilitating and leading, putting everything back together. You're continuing the dominance by accepting the responsibility and the consequences of your actions, even if they are pleasant, wanted consequences from actions given full consent. One of the worst things you can do is just turn and walk away afterwards. Like, one of the key things for me understanding this was a former partner of mine. We had a lot of issues, and when we finally sat down and talked about it, one of the things that really bothered them was after we did have sex, I would immediately go to the bathroom and wash off. And to me, that was just being like, oh, I'm doing this because I want to be clean. I don't want to cause stains on their sheets or anything. I'm coming back to them afterwards. What they needed was me to stay there. Who cares about the stains on the sheets? I need you to cuddle me. I need the endorphins and the oxytocin from your contact before you do that, because otherwise I just feel abandoned and used right away, and that sours the whole experience. Wouldn't have ever figured that out if we didn't communicate about it, though.
Yeah. I mean, that's that's a pretty big one for most of us humans that identify as female.
Yep.
We definitely like our cuddles and our connection after.
Oh yeah.
Don't jump out of bed and away from us. We don't like that. Okay. So I think that's kind of a good segue now that we talked about the scene. And thank you so much for going into so much detail about it. But How
Again,
does
over-explaining everything.
we like that here? It's okay. How does your dominance show up outside of scenes? Like, how does it actually show up in your real relationships or everyday life? I know we did touch on this a little bit earlier, so feel free to kind of skip some of the areas if you don't want to repeat them. But yeah.
Well, I would say dominance in that there's a lot of things with my partner where outside of a scene, due to their anxiety over various things, various traumas that they've had growing up, they have a tendency to get stuck. And so when I recognize that they are getting stuck, then my automatic response and the one they need is for me to just take the executive function and just be the one making the decisions. Where if and it could be something like we're trying to figure out where to go for dinner. And I want to make sure that I'm being heard, but I also want to make sure I know what they're wanting. They could get into analysis paralysis and be like, okay, I can't make this decision. Well, then it's up to me to just go, okay, well, this is what we're doing. This is where we're going. It's going to take us this amount of time to get there. So I just need you to start getting ready. Just, I'll take care of like feeding the dog. I will take care of like cleaning up this mess from the like this previous thing that we were doing, like maybe we're building Lego or something. I'll put it all together. You just go get ready. This is where we're going. This is what we're doing. And that's one of the ways that it shows up, is that I recognize when a partner is struggling with something. And so the dominance is just, I'm going to just do this and start doing it. Also, when I see they're having emotional trouble, knowing that what their rewards are, I can do some of those to help snap them out of the emotional trouble or at least regulate it. Like if they're beating themselves up over something that they did or because they had an irrational response to something, if I know they have a praise kink, I can tell them how proud I am of them, how strong they've been, because that will help them by appealing to their, oh, I like this. Okay, the person that I view in a favorable light in a position of leadership essentially is expressing to me and reminding me how strong I am and how well I did. This is helping me regulate. So that's some of the ways that it can show up outside of scenes.
And boy, do we ever love it. Sometimes as submissives when that happens, it's very nice. What do you think that people misunderstand about the desire to dominate?
Well, I think a lot of people conflate that desire with the desire to abuse people. With the a desire that it's, I want to be the one in charge and I'm going to just step on as many people as I can to get there. I think it's the desire to dominate is perfectly fine. It's when you let that be the controlling factor that's the problem. It's very similar to things like jealousy. People view jealousy as an inherently bad trait, but at the end of the day, I can be jealous that somebody else is going on a vacation and I can use that to motivate me to want to go on a similar vacation or do that for myself. That's a healthy way that jealousy presents itself. If I used it to try and sabotage their trip, or if I tried to let it make me be miserable, that would be that's how jealousy manifests itself as bad. And so a lot of people don't think about that. They just think of the extreme negative consequences of things like a desire to dominate or jealousy or greed. I mean, it's not inherently bad. It's when you let that become the driving factor and throw everyone else's considerations out the window.
I mean, what it sounds like to me a little bit is that your desire to dominate is truly more of a desire to lead and have leadership. And that is very different from the way that society looks at what dominance means as a general term.
I would twist that just a little bit because it's less about being the leader and what you can do with it. Like, to me, the goal is not to have power. It's what you use the power for. And as a dom, like my specific breed of dom, as you were, it's a bit of an outdated term, but it's one that just stuck with me when I first saw it like 7, 8 years ago, is a pleasure dom, where I get my enjoyment from causing the other person enjoyment. And that's what I think is the desire to for dominance is I put myself in a position where I have the power to care for other people, where I have the power to improve other people's lives. I don't want the power simply so that I am the leader. I want to have the power so that I can make someone's life better.
See, this is so interesting. I feel like I have to bring you back for another show where we can talk about specifically what you just said, because the way that you said that you like dominance is the exact same way that I like submission. I get the exact same thing out of it, and I have the same power in it. It is the want of creating pleasure for somebody else that is so intense that my pleasure really is their pleasure. That is very interesting. I really want to have a show where we just talk about how the desire to dom and to sub actually comes from the exact same place, and it can basically feel identical.
Yeah,
that is a brilliant thing that we came up with, but we're going to save that for another show, because that is a whole discussion that I would absolutely love to have. But one of the questions that I want to ask everybody on this show is, what was one of the most like remembered sexual experiences of your life? Like something that just really stuck out to you as like a peak experience that you had that was sexual, and then what made it that way? Like, was it just the physical? Was it more than the physical? Was it that one of your deepest desires got finally paid attention to? Like, can you walk us through that if you're comfortable with it?
Well, that actually ties into what we were just talking about, because the biggest experience I think that comes to mind in that way, I was having something of a fling with someone, and we had hooked up, and I had never been with somebody whose body was so physically sensitive, to the point that I was amusing myself by just going, how many orgasms can I make you have again and again and again and again without taking a break? And so afterwards, like after part of the aftercare, when we're like cuddling in bed together, she's talking about how she's never had that happen before. And her body is like involuntarily just twitching every like 20, 40 seconds kind of thing, because just basically I had played xylophone on her nervous system for the last like 90 minutes. And there's definitely a big part of the ego for me where it was just like, hey, look at me. I did that to you and you now can't control yourself. But also to me, that was one of the biggest expressions of, I have improved your life for the last like 90 minutes or so by just being able to lean into the things that you like, the things that you enjoy. And as soon as I figured those out, I was able to do my thing of just, I know what makes you happy. I am just going to keep punching the happy button as long as possible, because this is just building a feedback loop where I make you happy. Seeing that makes me happy and motivates me to then do more things to make you happy.
So it seems to me like that peak experience really was the fact that one of your deepest desires, which is to give pleasure, was incredibly satisfied from the sounds of it over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, because I found somebody who essentially did not seem to have any physical limits in that area. And one of the reasons we stopped was I was worried that they were going to start cramping up from dehydration.
Well, that sounds like a good time. Thank you for sharing.
But also, again, that goes back to what I said earlier about being vigilant and taking responsibility, where I'm the one who decided to stop it because I was worried about the physical well-being of my submissive. That's me accepting and taking responsibility and not just getting caught up in, wee, this is fun.
Well, thank you for being a responsible dominant. Makes me very happy.
I don't always get it right, but I always try to get it right.
So here's the last two questions, and hopefully we're going to leave our listeners with something to chew on here. This is a deep one, so take your time with it. What does being a dominant give you that nothing else does?
I mean, it gives that sense of control. It gives that sense of responsibility. Um, I think a lot of people want responsibility in some way for a lot of healthy reasons. Like, if somebody decides that they want to be a parent, they, to some extent, want that responsibility, and that is one of the ultimate expressions of responsibility. Dominance gives me that without it having to be a full time job. Like, if I had kids, for example, and I'm a responsible adult and a responsible parent, I can never turn off being a parent until they're like 25. Even if they move out beforehand, you're still their parent, you're still teaching them stuff. You're still responsible for them to a certain point. With dominance, especially in a BDSM sense or in a dynamic scene sense, you can turn it off. You can take a break. You can set the terms of, I am going to be this person who has all the power, all the control, all the responsibility for this set time period. And then once that's over and everything's back to balance, I don't have to be in charge anymore. I can go lie on the couch and play video games if I so desire. I don't have to keep one eye open because little Timmy's running around and somehow he got into the knife drawer.
That makes sense. So it gives you the ability to take a break when you need to and basically only give into your desires when you actually feel.
Hilariously enough, I like dominance because it gives me dominance over my own life. I get to set my own schedule, I get to make my own decisions, and I choose if I let someone else affect that.
Brilliant. Now, if somebody is curious about dominance but afraid of, getting it wrong, what would you want them to understand going forward?
You're going to get it wrong. It's impossible not to. You can have a lifetime, like 60 years of experience, and still get it wrong. You're going to make mistakes. The main thing is do the communicating, do the consent, pay attention, and when you make mistakes, you learn from them. Like, my partner and I, we don't use a safe word. We use what's commonly known as the traffic light system, where if something goes horribly, terribly wrong and we need to just stop, like pull on the emergency brakes, they're going to say red. If something is uncomfortable and we need to have like a quick discussion and an adjustment, then it's yellow. That could be something like, hey, we had talked about how you weren't going to like spank me there. You just did. Just mind that that's a boundary. You need to step back. I take ownership for that. I apologize. Once everything's good to go, green, let's keep going. And it could even be something like a physical discomfort, like yellow, hey, my hip's starting to hurt a bit. Can we just adjust? Okay, let's get here. We're all good. Awesome. Green, let's go. You're always going to get it wrong. You're always going to make mistakes, but that's how you learn. And that's where you can mitigate a lot of these by having a discussion beforehand. If you're going to have a scene with someone, especially if either one or both of you have never done this kind of scene before, like I mentioned edge play, if neither of you have ever done anything with sharp edges, you need to have that discussion because both of you are going to have different ideas of what that's going to entail. You need to know where there are no-go zones. Part of communication is also learning. There are videos about this stuff on YouTube. There are workshops everywhere. I knew nothing about edge play and was terrified about edge play until I went to a workshop on it. And then it's like, okay, now I'm fascinated. I have an idea as to the psychology behind it, as well as some of the tricks and the tips on what to avoid and how to do this thing and not do that thing. And so when we actually did our scene, for the most part, it went beautifully. But I would have made a ton of mistakes if we hadn't communicated about it, if we hadn't used the resources to teach ourselves about it. And at the end of the day, you have to take your ego out of the situation and go, I might be an expert on something. I might have developed a system of caning for the last 40 years, but I can still mess up. It's the same way that you have professional athletes who have been like goalies or quarterbacks for 20 years, and they're still going to have a terrible game. They're still going to let in a stupid, easily blocked goal. They're still going to whiff on the touchdown pass in the last 2 seconds of the game because they're human and because they're not the only ones involved. So you need to take your ego out of it. You need to be humble and admit when you need to learn stuff. And you need to be open to the idea that you will make mistakes. The thing isn't that you're not going to make mistakes. It's how do you deal with them and how do you work to try and not repeat them for the future.
So, it sounds like it comes down to education, communication, consent, and humility.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending the afternoon having this interview with me. I really, really appreciate it. And we'll have to get another show going so that we can talk more about power dynamics.
Sounds like a blast.
Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
All right, now that that is over, I want to take a moment to actually land this conversation. And one of the things that I really appreciated about this interview is how clearly it showed that real dominance is not about force or intimidation or control, but it's actually about responsibility. It's about accountability, humility. It's about communication that's clear and ongoing and honest. It's about consent that's lived and felt, not just, verbally agreed to once. And what came through again and again is how much care and work actually goes into holding that role well, and how much, emotional presence and regulation and integrity that it actually requires. And something that really stayed with me is how central his partner's well-being and pleasure are to the meaning that he finds in dominance. This isn't about taking power for its own sake. It's about using power in a way that genuinely makes another person's life better. I really think conversations like this matter, especially in a world that tends to flatten power into something either dangerous or simplistic, when the reality of it is so much more complex and so much more human. So if this episode, sparked something for you, I would love for you to sit with it, reflect on it, and notice what comes up in your own relationship to desire, leadership, and responsibility. I want to thank you all for listening so much. For more deep dives into erotic psychology, relationship advice, and shadow work, consider subscribing to my Substack and follow me on all my other socials that are linked in the show notes. And as always, take care of yourselves and each other.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to hit that follow button to know when the next episode releases.